Hi everybody, here we are again back in the Woodworking Wisdom Workshops. It's Tuesday afternoon, 3 o'clock. Now, you may have guessed already, you may not have, it's not live. And as much as we promise you it's going to be live, there's a few little internet bugs that we just got to iron out first. So it will happen probably next week now, but for the minute, you've got a recorded me. And we're going to do some spindle work. I can assure you though, a little bit like the analogy about the swan, this is the serene above the water bit, but behind the scenes our feet are paddling like mad trying to get the live sessions out for you, so please bear with us. Until then, of course, we're going to put out some content for you, and I'm starting with the spindle work, like I said, and this is something that we have done before, but not with our technology that we've got here. So despite the fact we're not coming live to you, we still have all the camera angles to get the message across a little bit easier. I do have people going to ask questions. We've got Craig, we've got Ben, we've got Jason, we've got Rich. They're all behind the scenes, they're all watching, so there will be questions. Again, I'm going to do my best to answer the questions as we get to them as well. So you may have guessed, spindle work is going to involve a lot of those basic tools, and one of my favorites, of course, the Skew chisel. So we've got a few examples to show you. To demonstrate spindle turning, I'm going to do 4 projects, starting off with a practice piece, basically just making shapes. And then we're going to do a table leg. Regular viewers, again, will have seen that, but that involves an awful lot of spindle technique, including turning a pummel, coves, beads, fillets, all those sorts of things. Then we're going to give you a couple of little projects. So a little fun one, a little honey stirrer, which is a favourite of spindle turners, and a little lace bobbin. We'll go right back to where I started in turning and turn a small lace bobbin for you. So we're going to get started straight away. There might be a little bit of dust extraction going on at some points. The microphone won't have a problem with that, of course, so don't worry. So this is our practice piece. I know that. If you go to camera 3, please, Rich, I know that because it says practice piece on the top, look. So we're going to turn this basically down to a cylinder, and we're going to use a roughing gouge to do that. Then we're going to skew chisel, and I'm going to create some catches for you. I will tell you before we get a catch. So if I get a catch without telling you, that's my mistake. This piece did have a little bit of a crack in it, so I've put some CA glue up through the crack just to hold it together. But essentially, it's just a piece of softwood, and it's going to make sure that we get the best possible finish, or help us to get the best possible finish. It doesn't really suffer any falls, this sort of timber. It doesn't really matter what timber you use for practice pieces. It can be an old door frame, an old window frame. This particular stuff is just building a grade of pine. So that's all we're going to use. So let's start off with a roughing gouge first. So 3/4 roughing gouge. Here's my roughing gouge. Ground around about 45 degrees on the ground angle here. And all we're going to do, set the tool rest just below center. So camera 2, I think, Rich, would be the best one for this. So just below center with the tool rest. And then we're going to rough down the cylinder, and then I can get the skew chisel working. So if we stick with that one for a second, Rich. Lay speed to 0 to start with. I've already checked to make sure the tool rest was not going to climb the corners. We're going to turn up on this particular piece to around about 1600. This is a piece of 3x3 or 75mm square and 10 inches long, so around about 250. And so there we are, 1600 revs. I'm right-handed, so my left hand goes forward. Tool down on the tool rest first, and nice low handle to start with, and raise the handle up to create my cut. Come forward to start with. You might have heard that clashing in the middle. We've got a knot going on here, but that's a feature. That's not a flaw. We're happy with knots because they create color, they create swirls, they create something interesting. So that's all nice. Not a very good finish though. Again, Rich, go to number 3. I think that'll show that finish off quite well. And you saw my movements there. They were quite rapid across the top of that surface. Let me slow things down in terms of my movement. and that will help to clean things up a little bit. However, you're still not going to get an amazing finish off a roughing gouge. It's not one of those tools where the bevel's rubbing that creates that clean finish. So we move on to a skew. But I want to show you what happens when a skew goes wrong. So let's just look at a standard skew to start with. I'm not going to start talking about my German skews just yet, or that sort of style. We're going to go with standard skew. So standard skew, flat-faced, flat-edged. Okay, it might be radius slightly here, that's fine, or might be slightly dulled over, that's fine. But essentially it's a standard skew, which most people will have. I'm going to show you what happens when we get this wrong. And when we start skew cutting, we're going to start with the shorter heel of the skew lower and close to the tool rest, the toe at the top. But it's when the toe catches that causes all the issues. So let's start exactly where the tool rest is. And again, I think, Rich, if we can go to number 2, please. At the moment, if I come along that tool rest, the tool rest is quite low. It throws the tip of the tool dangerously close to the work. And what I mean by dangerously close, if it becomes into contact, that tip isn't actually in touch with the tool rest. It's only the bottom, the heel section's in touch with the tool rest. That's where it falls over, and that's the bang that you hear. So here we go. I'll create a catch. Get ready. It's going to make a bit of a bang. So that tip comes in contact. So if that noise is familiar, the reason being is your tip is getting too close. So there's a couple of things we can do to stop that from happening. Firstly, raise the tool rest. That's an important part of it. Because as soon as you raise the tool rest, your tip is thrown higher and out the way. We're then going to start by rubbing bevels. So you want to hear a noise. So rub the bevel. That noise, I don't know whether you can hear that one, but that noise is what you want to hear. Then raise the handle until you see shavings. And the shavings we want to get are those there. You can see on the heel of the tool where those shavings are. They're not up high, they're down on the heel. Bottom half of the tool needs to be doing the work. And then once we've got the bevel rubbing, move to the outside edge. And look for the right type of shavings. The right type of shavings, to me, are plainer shavings and not chips. So I don't know whether you can make those shavings out, but they're like a hand plane shaving, not chips, not dust. Coming back the other way. The angle that you're going to present your parting tool to is about 45 degrees to the top line of the work. Yes, I think we've got a question.
So we've got a question now. Yeah, there's a variety of different widths of skew. Some wider, an inch, bigger than that sometimes.
Yeah.
Is there a benefit of using a wider one than a narrow one?
Yeah. Okay, so the question was about the width of the tool. When would you use a wider tool over a smaller one? So let's say, for instance, I'm doing this sort of project. So this is a 3-inch, 75mm. I would want to use something like an inch or 25mm skew chisel. If I'm working on, let's say, a lace bobbin, okay, a lace bobbin, something like that, then obviously an inch chisel or 25mm chisel is going to be far too big. So that's the case that I would then go over to a smaller skew, something like maybe this one. So small skew, small work, big skew, big stuff. I demonstrated once next to a French turner whose party trick, when the crowd went quiet, would get out a side axe and start skew cutting with a side axe, just to make the crowd go ooh. Okay, let's just do a few more of those cuts a minute. So bevel rubbing, run the tool along. It's a really pleasing cut. Once you get this going, get the bevel rubbing, get the cut cutting, and you can back cut as well if you're roughing down. Nothing wrong with back cutting. And then forward again, always finishing on a forward cut. There we are. Now this is going to be a practice piece. I'm not going to finish this practice piece because this is going to involve bead after bead after bead after bead. We're going to do a couple, then we're going to move on to an actual project. So there we are, nice clean finish. That means it's smooth, that means sanding isn't going to be an issue. So practice piece. let's say, for instance, we're going to do 25mm or an inch beads. Let's just mark them with a pencil. Don't need to measure anything. Just roughly, you can mix the sizes up if you want to and practice with the smaller skews or the bigger skews. Tool rest is still high. Now, I'm going to use the long point, the bit that we didn't want to make contact when we were planing, we're now going to use, but this time I'm going to use it downwards, so closer to the tool rest. And to start with, we're going dead upright. I'm just making a line. Those pencil marks are turning into cuts. Now I'm going to slightly angle the tool over. So there we are, slight tilt. Start to one side of my line, push forward. Angle the other way, push forward. And we're going to keep doing that until we've got a nice deep V. And using the skew, rolling beads, all those sorts of things, it's about creating muscle memory. But just like, again, using another analogy, it's like riding a bike. You've got to develop the muscle memory in order to do it correctly each time. Now, if we were going to go on with a skew chisel, first of all, I'd roughly mark the center of the bead. And I know a lot of you have got lathes for Christmas. This may be your start to your turning journey, so this is always going to be an issue to start with. And, you know, don't worry that you're not going to get these techniques there straight away. You know, they got to be learnt over some time. So even if it means your bead forming to start with will be a scrape, it doesn't matter. You can put the skew chisel down flat and scrape that bead around. Don't worry about it. No one's watching apart from you. Okay, as long as you achieve what you want. But to cut a bead, we need to roll with the skew. So that's going to mean back to the heel. And it's going to be just rolling that skew over until your corner, your heel makes contact. Once it makes contact, then you can roll. As you roll, just lift the handle a little bit. One more time. Lifting the handle. Same from the other side. We're going to put this all into practice in a minute and show you where you can use these all the way over. Now, a very common thing when it comes to rolling beads is the kick as you come around that curve. So I'm going to show you why. At the moment, as I roll over, my handle is in line with my cutting edge. So dead in line. If you bring your handle round as you roll, you are actually, so I'm now at that sort of an angle. If you do that, you're actually removing the workpiece, and this is what happens. It's another catch, a very recognizable catch. Let's start the bead over first. So I'm going to start the bead over. Now I'm going to move my handle round, and you watch this catch. Immediate. The minute I bring that handle round this way, the bevel gets removed from the work, and bang, we get a catch. It's a spiraled catch you'll see a lot of. And you can just see the spiral there coming up. Yes, another question.
So you talk about getting the blade in effect in line. But what about angle of the handle?
How high?
Yeah.
And how low? Absolutely. So again, if I start here, at the moment I'm around about the same position I was with the roughing gouge, and what I'm trying to do is make the bevel rub. So as long as I've got bevel rubbing to start with, I can bring my handle up until I engage the timber with the cutting edge. So you slowly engage the timber, not go straight in with a cut, because you don't know how much bevel's rubbing. So start by rubbing the bevel, then raise the handle, then you can turn. So as soon as you get that contact, you can then raise the handle through the cut. If you don't raise the handle, so let me just get the cut going there. If I carry on doing that without raising the handle, my cut's going to disappear. It's not going to carry on cutting. So I've got to keep that bevel in contact. Because that timber's falling away from us, keep the bevel in contact as we cut. Okay? Now, that's the skew chisel. There are other tools out there that make that practice, that learning process, a little bit easier. This one's called a beading and parting tool. This is a similar tool to the skew. except it's square in section. So just camera 3, I think, a second, Rich. It's square in section. Look, this particular one's 10mm or 3/8, and it has no skew angle. It's specifically designed for rolling beads and parting. Massive bevel on it. I think this one's ground probably to about 40 degrees. So you're not going to get as clean a finish with it, but you will get a slightly easier tool to use. The only downside with one of these tools is when it comes to V cuts, you're not going to get a very crisp V because it's so splayed out. Okay, skew chisel is a little bit finer, that's the only thing. But if you're practicing and you're really struggling with the skew, I may maybe start with something like that, a beading and parting tool. Okay, I'm going to put this practice piece to one side now. We're going to start working on an actual project. So we're going to go with the same timber, so that can go to one side, and we're going to go slightly longer. I want to do a little table leg. It's something that I demonstrate all the time because it's such a great work piece to show off spindle gouge, skew chisel, roughing gouge, all those tools which we depend on as spindle turners. So all I'm doing is marking gauge there, just getting the center. Then I'll use a bradawl just to put a little center point in. And because this is softwood, the winter and the summer growth is very different in density. And so you've got to be careful. On the tailstock, I'm using a ring center. So it's a center that isn't a single point. It's got a ring around the point. The summer growth is very, very soft compared to the hard winter growth. So the dark lines here, that's the winter growth. So what can happen is the center will drift off. And if you're trying to do what I'm about to do, which is create a pummel, that square to round section, you need to stay centered. So that's why I'm going with a pro drive in the headstock and a ring center in the tailstock. There we are. Remember that I was turning at 1600 revs before. I'm going to now change that back down to 0, or my slowest setting. I'm going to keep the tool rest high because I'm going to start with a skew. If I just start now with a roughing gouge, what's likely to happen? These corners are going to break away. So the pummel, the bit that I want left square, will get damaged. Now, in normal circumstances, if this was a leg, this would be planed up and squared already. This is just rough sawn at the moment. It's just a practice piece. Don't forget that. So I'm going to cut my pummel in. Then I can rough down the rest of this and start creating shapes. So my pummel's going to go about there. So if I just do a line with a rule, or something else that's straight. There we are, a bit of timber. Let's go a bit longer on the pummel actually. I only need to create that line because as soon as the timber starts rotating, you'll see in a minute, you'll still be able to see that line as it rotates. Yes, another question.
So keep mentioning tool height.
Yes.
And that's in relation to the workpiece. What about lathe height overall? You know, on a bench, on a stand, on your Black & Decker workmate.
Yes.
What's a recommendation?
Good point. Again, lots of you out there will be getting your first lathe, so all of these things are yet to be discovered. The general rule for lathe height is elbow height. So elbow height to center of the lathe. So center height is where the centers go to. So that generally is where your height should be in terms of view. We're all different heights. There's no direct way of raising or lowering a lathe. You can raise yourself up a little bit, or you have to create blocks. That's another way of doing it. I'd be honest, my lathes, I prefer them slightly higher than elbow height, just to save my neck. It's too much leaning over, and if you're doing a lot of turning, you might discover the same thing. But that's the general rule. Think about that if you're on a workbench. It might be that your lathe is too high. It's too in your face if you're on a workbench, or the other way around. So yeah, think about that. Generally, the general rule is elbow height to center height. Okay, lathe speed to 0, turn the machine on, and now you should see, if we go to camera, yeah, that's it. Let me just stop that a minute, let me get my camera back on track. There we go. You can see the line there. So what we're going to do is cut that line in with the skew. So let's go. In fact, before we do, let me introduce splayed skews now. That's a perfect camera there, Rich. Thank you. There is a German style skew. I say German style. That is a German skew. I bought that from a place called Obenhau in the Ore Mountains. This is a hand forged carbon steel skew. You can see all the fettling marks there. It's hand forged, basically beaten with a hammer. It starts off this thickness, and as it gets beaten, it gets splayed out to this thickness. The other effect that has is it creates a taper, so it gets thinner toward the end as well. So that makes a wonderfully balanced tool for its width. We're using a small amount of steel really to create a fairly wide skew chisel. Liking them so much, they weren't available in the UK. Liking them so much, we've worked with Crown Tools to produce our own, and this is where you'll find the Colwin Way skews. If anybody's out there trying to get a skew, at the moment they will be available by the end of January. And if you're watching this in 10 years' time, this is January 2021. All right, they will be available from Axminster then, the end of. So we're going to use one of those. They're a little bit thinner. So watch my line. I'm going to start about, 12 mil, half an inch away from the line. I want to be fairly rapid with this speed. So we're going to go, there we are. That's 1500 revs. So let's start with one of the splayed skews. Make sure everything's nice and tight. So an upright cut first. Upright cut first. I'm just going to stop the lathe a minute, get my focus back in play. There we are. And then I'm tilting the skew slightly. Just swap camera there a second. Rich, let's get a better view. Lovely. And Rich, maybe you could sort that camera out whilst we're looking at it from this way. Okay. So I'm basically doing a V cut. So I'm coming in from an angle, using the point of the tool. If I need more room, I'm coming from the other side as well. So I've always got room on the sides. I'm not anywhere near connecting with the higher end of the skew. I'm always going to be in the right place. Literally nothing to catch. There. Now what I've done there is created a fireball really. So if I start roughing this section down and something starts splitting out, it doesn't matter because it's going to go as far as here and stop. This will not be affected. So now I can start roughing down. So we go back with a roughing gouge. Same 3/4 or an inch, doesn't matter. Now one thing you may notice, I'm not going anywhere near the pummel at the moment. If I come too close to that pummel, what I'm likely to do is catch a corner, and that could be a problem. So when I want to take that area away, I'm just going to turn the roughing gouge over and back cut. There we are. And remember, always keep your mouth shut when you're doing that. Lovely. There we are. Now look, we've still got that rough finish. We know that, so we're going to clean it up now with the skew. Let's go for the big one. Let's go for the big German style skew. Bevel rub, lift the handle. There's the cut. Look at this. I mean, they are real joys to use. When you get them sharpened right, you get all the angles right, they'll give you the cleanest of finishes. Then we're going to turn them over. Exactly the same. I'm going to keep the same grip, same hands. There we are. One more cut this side. The bottom of this leg is going to come down in diameter a little bit in a minute. Running along that tool rest nicely. Now, another question. Go for it.
You mentioned just about sharpening and getting the sharpening right. Is there any tips or any quick fixes for sharpening? We all like to sharpen quick and get back to the lathe. What would you recommend? Yeah, so sharpening a skew. There are a lot of questions on sharpening skews that I get. And one of the big questions is, can you sharpen the German skews on a tool? And yes, you can. Don't worry of the fact that they're splayed. That makes no difference. They'll still hold in the jig absolutely fine, so don't worry about that. The only thing I would say, if you're using a Tormek style jig for skews, is don't rely on the settings on them. You have to set yourself, which is an easy thing to do, and we'll do another video on that. Or look through the past videos. I've done plenty on setting up a skew in the Tormek jig. But I would say mechanically grinding a skew chisel, just do that to find your angle. Once you've got your angle, then most of your sharpening will be done with a diamond file. And I've got two here. So we've got one of the DMT credit card type files. Okay. And then we've got one of the Axminster fold away files. And this is a dual file, this one. So you've got a 600 on one side, and I believe it's a 300 on the other. So using the 600, of course, to sharpen, the coarser side's just literally for reshaping. But all you're going to do is take the file to the tool, not the other way around, otherwise you end up stabbing yourself. So take the file to the tool, find the bevel. So there we are, find the bevel, then you can start filing. I literally just done this before we started filming a minute ago, and you only have to do sort of 3 or 4 passes. It's all about keeping the tool sharp rather than sharpening it once it becomes blunt. Okay, so just keep an edge on there. So there we are. That's the generally I visit a mechanical. I know once every 10 sharpens. That's all it's going to be. So look, we've got this nice little firewall here. I'm going to do another V cut. And this one's a little bit deeper, and then we can roll over, and we're keeping the bevel rubbing. Now I'm going to do quite a hard shoulder here, so one more of those. So there we are, around with that heel. Now you may have seen there that I'm holding the steel of the tool, and that's the whole point with these type of skews. The deal is you hold the steel. The handle's just an afterthought, and a traditional German skew will only have the handle as long as one hand. So all of this down here just wouldn't be there. And the reason being, you hold the steel because then you feel the bevel contact between the steel and the timber. So I find by holding the steel, you can feel the bevel rubbing more. And if you're struggling with a skew, that's probably the best way to use it. Now I'm going to go to a smaller skew because I'm just going to round these two edges over here. Just make a half bead. So again, same cut. Just because we're using a smaller skew doesn't matter. And we're going to go to a slightly different tool after this. We're going to go to a spindle gouge. It's one side and then the other. And we're going to do a little cove in here. One more. All the way to the bottom of the V-cut. So they're 2 half beads. Right, so now to a spindle gouge. So spindle gouges, very, very different to bowl gouges. They're flat in their flute. So very, very shallow curve in the flute. And we can use these almost like a skew, really. So we're going to go fairly deep. Bevel rubbing, and look how much twist. Unlike a bowl gouge, A spindle gouge wants to be scooped. You're scooping the timber out. A bowl gouge, you're fixing your flute in position almost. Just go, that one's a little bit dull. Let me go to a sharper one. You're fixing, that's better. Yeah, with a bowl gouge, you're fixing your flute in position. With a spindle gouge, you're twisting it to keep the bevel rubbing. There we are, one more cut. Just a, alright, maybe one more cut again. There we are, that'll do it. So there's our little cove. Now look what we've got. We've got nice sharp edges because we cut at the beginning or we sliced at the beginning of the cut. So we're not raking anything. So you get a good definition. Okay, I'm going to move that tool rest now. We're going to come down to the bottom of the leg. Drop the handle a little bit because I'm going to use a roughing gouge. Just to make a couple of cuts to take a bit of diameter away. There we go. And then stop the lathe again. I've just got to be careful of this pummel. I don't want to catch my fingers or the tool rest on that, so I'm just stopping the machine. Raise the tool rest up again. Skew chisel. We'll create a nice little finishing cut here because we want to make a foot. There we are, V-cut. So the cuts, V-cuts, rolling the bead, they're all the same. Nice and deep, so we do a hard shoulder. We didn't see that one. Hard shoulder. Not as hard as I wanted it to be in the first place, but there we are. And then we can take this all the way down. There we are, just a little bit of softening of the end. So this is just a V cut. Softening of that end there. So that as it hits the floor, it's not going to damage anything. And then we're going to roll over. Just come above or to the one side a minute. We've got so just like you're doing a bead. So it's just rolling a bead over it. Because effectively that's what that is. It's a half bead. Okay, so let's go a little bit lower again. There we go. And I'm going to come down now to what will be the thinnest part of our leg. Okay, and we're going to go with a bowl gouge. And I'll tell you why I'm going with a bowl gouge. It's just I can get a little bit more leverage with a small bowl gouge in that area because I want to take quite a lot of timber away. Now look how fixed. How fixed my flute is. My flute isn't changing as I come around that corner. There we are, that's enough. Next job. There's that section there now needs roughing down. It's too big. Okay, before I start doing anything with the skew, I need to rough that down. So back with our roughing gouge. Now I'm going to stop the lathe just to check on that knot.
I don't want to get rid of the knot if I can help it, but I just want to make sure it's not going to break in two halfway through. Look at that knot. It does go quite a long way through, but I think it's going to be sound. And what that will give us is some incredible patterning going through there. So that's a nice feature. So a little bit higher with the tool rest. Let's go with, again, a nice splays skew. We're just going to tidy up that edge. Bevel's in contact all the time. Right down to the edge. Let's just have a look. Stop the lathe, see where we are with that. Another question, Craig. Yes.
If you do get a knot like that you're concerned about, is it end of piece? Can you do anything to make that knot a bit more secure?
Stable? Yeah, you can. We spoke about CA glue earlier. There's the CA glue. Oh, in fact, I don't think you can see it anymore. It's sunk that far in. CA glue was along that weak point there. So you got centre pith here, and it split from there. So a little bit of the thin CA glue drizzled in. Make sure before you start turning though that everything's nice and dry. Otherwise you'll end up turning and it's spraying up at you. So CA glue just doused in there. Use some accelerator if you want to. Be aware that you will get a little bit of colour change to the CA glue when you use accelerator, and watch the fumes. But that will certainly harden that sort of thing up. I mean, a knot like that, we don't want it to come out at this stage. We want it to stay in there, because if it comes out, obviously you've got a big void in there. But it's a nice, attractive feature to that piece. It's not going to do for its job of a table leg. It's not going to weaken it sufficiently enough to worry about it. But it is a nice little feature. So there we are. Let's take that leg off and show you where we are. It's a little coffee table leg. Okay, nice little practice piece. There's an awful lot of tool technique going into that. We even used the bowl gouge at the last little bit. So there we are, one of our little legs. So we're going to move on. We're going to move on to something, again, a bit more practical this time. We're going to go to a honey stirrer. Again, we need to just change or center up, and then I'll change our centers. I paused then because I wasn't quite sure what to use in terms of centers, because there's so much you can use. You can, of course, use your 4-prong drive, which would be your go-to center that comes with any lathe. 2-prong drive, yeah, if you've got a 2-prong drive. It needs to be of a size that's not going to be too cumbersome. My favourites, I got two favourites actually. Favourites are going to be either a Pro Drive, and the right Pro Drive size for this one would be, again, camera 3 there a second, Rich, would be that one. Pro Drives are serrations around the outside with a little sprung centre in the middle, so that would be quite good for this piece. Or a ring centre. Ring centres are friction drives. Okay, so they're similar, or same profiles as the tailstock centre I'm using at the moment. And that's got a little ring around it. That purely will drive through friction. I think we'll go with the Pro Drive though, because I think it's going to need a little bit more pressure than I get from the friction drive. So let's take out our big Pro Drive. There we are. We need a little bit of a prod with the bradawl. And then straight onto the centre point, tailstock up. And all we have here is we'll have a couple of little ends we just need to take out with or sand at the end with the little disc sander. I'll show you that in a sec. But my tool rest, and as requested from last week, we've got our robust tool rests here. This particular one's the big 380 mil. If you see behind me, other side behind me, I do have the others here already and waiting for the other projects. So we're tooled up with tool rests. A little bit quicker. It's a smaller project, smaller diameter to start with,
so I can go a little bit quicker. I'm going 1900 revs there. Start with the rough and gouge. The timber we're using here is ash, so it's a little bit harder than the softwood we were just using. There we are. Now you're going to make your honey stirrers to suit you. If you've only got small jars of honey, then just make a small honey stirrer. If you've got loads, then make a bigger one. So this is going to be quite a lumpy one. This is about 35 mil, about 1.5 inches, probably a bit smaller. But I'm just skew cutting first, just to get that clean surface. And we're going to have the business end here. So I'll start shaping that now. We're going to use parting tool as well as our spindle gouge. Okay, so let's do the business end. We're going to shape that to a little, almost like a ball. No, balloon would be a better word for it, a balloon. And I want to leave enough waste at this end to be able to clean up, to tidy away afterwards. So bevel rubbing. There we are. At this end, I'm going to make it a little bit softer, so we're going to blend into the handle. Let's get the skew back out now. Only a slightly smaller skew chisel this time. We'll go with a medium. Now before I go too thin, let's go to the parting tool. We'll create our cuts. Now this is a little bit of a compromise here. The deeper you go, the more honey you're going to get trapped in there. But the weaker you make the piece, so and I'm viewing, you'll probably see it on the camera, I'm viewing down the cut to make sure that the bit left in the middle is the same throughout this cut. One more. Now that'll do us. A little bit more skew work. Take the end down here a minute. So just a V cut. We're going to end this with a nice little rounded top. So a little V cut here. Then we're going to clean the cut up and round him over.
So I've got another question, Colwin.
Yep.
You're dealing with a harder wood there, ash. Would you make any alterations to the lathe speed for that?
Not really. Well, no, I say not really. Sometimes the softer the material, the faster the speed needs to be. You want to give it a more of a glancing cut, if that makes any sense. Routers, for instance, they're dealing terrifically high speeds to create a clean finish. We have to sort of compromise between the centrifugal forces of the bigger bit of timber flying around and giving it fast enough speed to create a nice cut. For instance, if you're roughing a piece of timber down, you've got square sides, so 4 corners. If you do that slowly, the forces that you produce are far greater than if you do it at speed. So what I'm trying to say is the faster you go, the cleaner the cut tends to be. However, the most important thing is safety, and your safety. So you have to compromise the fast speed of a clean cut to the safety issues involved as well. So in terms of the density of the timber, yeah, softer timber, you need to go a little bit faster. But, we're talking minimal, really. So again, skew chisel, I'm just going to take this down as small as I can, or as I dare, because we'll just sand it off. I'll cut the end off in a minute. We'll sand it on the sander, and that'll be all we need to do. There we are, and the same on this end. So now we're going to sand. I'm going to have the dust extractor running. I'm going to start with 100 grit. We're then going to go through a 150, a 240, 400. And it's ash. We don't need to go more than that for this project. This is going to be an oil finish on this once it's all done. And so 400 to be ample. So ready. Here's the extractor. You shouldn't be affected too much. So 100. And the 100 grit, I've said this before, the 100 grit is the one that does most of the work. It takes away all the nasties, all the horrible tears if there are any, turning lines if there are any. There we are, 100. So now we go to 150. Okay, so that's all sanded. All we're going to do now is just part off. And what I've done on either end, I've just taken this down even further. So that hand, I'm just going to break that off hand in a minute, but now I can part off here with the skew. I need to hold the stirrer though. There we are. So that's parted off at that side. Okay, so that's come off. Now just flip that end off, he said, and that leaves me a nice little nib there to sand off. Now, So to sand off, just going to get a few things out of the way. We're going to add a chuck. So let's take out our drive. We're going to add a little SK100. And attached to the SK100 we've got some C-jaws. Okay, so C-jaws here. Now they've got a nice little dovetail on the outside. So if I close them right the way down, what I've done on our little sanding disc is added a faceplate ring. Regulars to Turning Tuesdays and Thursdays will know that we use these sanding discs an awful lot. So I'm expanding, sorry I didn't show you. There we are, so faceplate ring on the back. So this has a dovetail on the inside here. So expand the dovetail jaw into the ring, and on here we've got Velcro discs. But what I've done, this is, and we sell this as 100 millimeter wide, so 4-inch wide strips. But you can buy the Velcro discs as well if you want to. But using this means I can make a disc size to the discs or the abrasive discs I can buy. So you could even make one of these the size of your favourite random orbital sander discs, for instance. So you've got a little bit more freedom. And then all I'm going to do is just sand the edges, a hand sanding, and that's that project complete. Don't forget your speeds though. Start at very low speed. I want to be sanding here at around about 1,000 revs. Dust extraction back on. There we are, that's that done. Maybe a bit of 240 grit now, just by hand with the grain. Okay, you can see the grain there. So with the grain, and then once you've done this, you can soak them in oil, food safe oil. Remember, this is going to be submerged in honey. And the way they work, so if you don't know what a honey stirrer is basically you stir the honey gets trapped in here, and then you can deliver it to whatever you're going to put your honey on. There's a wodge of honey coming out of that one. It's quite a big one. Okay, so one last little project just to play with these spindle turning tools, and we're going to make a little lace bobbin. Lace bobbins are where I started my turning journey 30 odd year ago, and lace bobbins are used by lace makers to plait is all like the best terminology I can use, the thread to create the lace. Okay, these particular bobbins are what we call Midland lace bobbins, and they're designed to be used with spangles. Spangles are basically a posh name for beads. Beads, they could be glass, wooden, but the beads get threaded through a brass wire that gets threaded through the end of here, so we need a little 1mm drill bit there just to go through, brass wire around here, and the ladies put the number of beads on to suit the thickness of thread they're using. Most of the time bobbins used in pairs, okay, so not individuals, in pairs, and they can be up to sort of 200, 250 bobbins on a lace making pillow at one time. So I used to make a lot of these, and like I say, this is a Midland style. This is a shape that I've been used to for a good number of years. To make these though, I'll use solid sections of timber. There we are, and we're going to do, I don't know, let's do one out of this. This is Bubinga. This is a nice timber to play with. So I'm just going to change my chuck, and we're going to go with a pin style set of jaws. Again, it's something that I've used for a long time. But basically, anything pin style works really well. So the ones I'm going to use here are what you would commonly see or think of being engineering jaws. No, I'm going to make a bit of Padook. I'm going to do a Padook bobbin actually. This looks pretty nice. Wrong chuck key, Colwin. Concentrate. There we are. That Padook's quite striking. It's screaming at me. There we are. Yep. Now we're going to go to a smaller tool rest, of course. Let's go for that one. And we're going to change centres as well. I want to go to a single pointed centre. The ring centre is just too big for this project. So single point, exactly what its name suggests. Give myself plenty of room. Now, if you're making a batch, you'd set your dividers, your calipers, get everything the same. I'm not making a batch, I'm only making one for you, so we're going to go through the process. Lace speed to 0. Even though I've got a smaller piece of timber here, I'm going to put my lace speed to 0 just to get my bearings. Then I can turn it up, and I want to be plus 2,000. So when I say that, I mean sort of between 2,000, 2,500. Because now we've got, you think about surface speeds. This is a very small bit of timber, so the surface speed needs to be kept high. To do that, I need to turn the lathe speed up, the actual RPM of the lathe. We're going to use small skew. So let's go now. Here's a nice old skew. This one is a very old carbon steel skew again. And we're just going to rough down, back and forward. Back and forward. Let's drop that Taurus a little. That's a little bit too high at the moment. I'm going to go back to my German skew. Now that timber, it was a little bit too big for what I want, so I'm just going to take some of the diameter away. And the reason that I'm showing you all these different projects, they're all great practice. You don't have to have an expensive big bit of timber to practice things like skew chisels, spindle gouges. You can practice with the smallest bit of timber, and in fact sometimes a little bit more concentrated, so you have to sort of really study what's happening with the tools, and in this case the skew. So with a bobbin you need a neck. The neck is the bit that you wind the lace around. On the top, this design is carrying a thistle, so here we are. This is a very crude thistle. Go. And then the thin bit, the actual neck, will be done right at the end. I don't want to do that yet because it's going to create a weak spot. So 3 beads. 1, 2, 3. Of course, each bead requires a V-cut. Even at this size, you want a little V-cut. So do all the right-hand V's, parts of the V, then I'll go back, left, left. Then we roll. Then we roll the other side. So there's our beads. We've got a little half bead there, and then we've got our other 2. Now we're going to go to the bottom of the bobbin. So remember we were saying there's a little area where you have to wind or thread some brass wire. So that would be this section. This is another bead. And just above the bead, you've got a couple of V-cuts. So rolling the beads. Now this is the question earlier about size of skew. Now you can see here that a large skew just would get in the way. So that's why we're using that small one, so I don't hit my chuck. Now we'll start creating that nice little curve in the body of the bobbin. So there's the main body shape, a little bit lumpy there. Let's get rid of that. And now the neck. So the neck's down to usually around about 3 mil, about 1/8. And we go right to the heel point to get into your detail. There we are. Everything's relaxing a little bit now. You can see the tailstock center stopped moving. Because we've released a lot of tension, we've created a fairly narrow area. I'm going to sand this and show you the finished version. So we're going to go straight into a 240 grit, dust extraction on. You're not going to use a big sort of coarse 100 grit on this sort of stuff. There would be absolutely no need. Little tiny 240, then onto 400 is ample. Then we're going to use this friction polish. Just mold the paper to the shape of your bobbin. And of course, I'm making a bobbin here. I'm making a honey stirrer. You know, all those things. You make whatever project that you've got in mind. The technique is all the same. Everything that I've done here today, the technique right from the practice piece has been the same. So a little bit of friction polish now. So I've got the chestnut friction polish here. It's really, really good because it contains an awful lot of carnauba wax, which gives us a nice shine. It's going to darken the colour of the paduk. Okay, that's basically it. We're going to part off next. So parting off with a skew chisel. It's going to be done in the same way. Watch your fingers, of course. We're going to use the tip of the tool. Can we go above there, Rich? There we are. You can see what I'm doing. I'm basically doing a V-cut using the tip of the tool. A little bit careful with the extraction. If your extraction's on at this point, make sure that doesn't go down the chute. I'm going to bring my hand around just to support the bobbin as we part, and it'll just stop in your fingers. There we are, stops. You can remove, make sure everything's safe. And again, just go, there we are. And so you can just see there's maybe a little bit of waste right on the very end that just needs a bit of hand sanding. And then in your V-block, 1mm drill bit ready for that brass wire to come around. But there's your lace bobbin. Okay, Rich, right. Let's just have a little bit of a talk about where we are. So there we are. Some projects for you to practice your spindle tool work. So as we looked at more than just the skew chisel. We looked at the spindle gouge, roughing gouge. And incidentally, the roughing gouge, its full name is spindle roughing gouge. Never to be used on a bowl or a bowl blank. Bear that in mind. It's not for faceplate turning, it's for spindle work only. That's for those guys that have just got their lathe, just got their tools and are playing. You'll have an awful accident if you use your roughing gouge on faceplate work, so bowls basically. So we use roughing gouge, skew chisel, spindle gouge, bowl gouge, little honey stirrer, little bobbin, table leg, practice piece.
practice. That's what it all is about. Practice, 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 especially with the skew chisel. You're going to have a few catches before you get it right. I still get catches, as you've seen today. But enjoy what you're doing. So tomorrow, and we're going to have another nearly live with Ben. Ben's going to be pyroing his way through the carp that we started last week. So that's going to be the same time tomorrow in the Woodworking Wisdom Workshops. That's going to be with Ben the Pen Beddoes. He's going to be decorating our carp. And then, of course, on Thursday, once again with Craig doing some routering, if that's the correct word. Routering, he's got his thumbs up. So thank you ever so much for watching, guys. Like I say, I promise you, we will be live. I desperately want to hear all your questions, and that's the bit I like about going live. So until next time, have a great turning evening, and I'll see you next week. But join Ben tomorrow at 3. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.